and I want to say again, welcome to Front Row Conversations. I'm so excited this morning because, again, I have another wonderful guest. I have Reverend Khalia Williams, who's going to be with us today. And Front Row's Conversations is authentic conversations with pastors' wives and ministry leaders around emotional and spiritual health for purposeful living. And our guest today, as I said before, is Reverend Khalia Williams. And our conversation today is maintaining your voice while working it out. And before I greet her, again, I want to say a special thank you to Gail Sylvia with Sylvia Global Media, who empowers women and girls through digital media globally. And so again, Gail Sylvia, thank you for this wonderful opportunity for us to have real, authentic conversations. Hey, Khalia.
Hey, Felicia, how are you?
I'm great. Good morning. Well, as I was working through all of my stuff, and when I'm thinking and praying about shows, I thought about what a wonderful opportunity to talk to someone who not only has been in ministry a long time, but who was also a new pastor's wife. So the thought came to me, maintaining your voice. Girl, then I said, while working it out.
That's right.
How about that, Khalia?
That's right. I love it.
You love it. Now, let me tell the audience why I said while working it out. I have to read a little bit of her bio because I wanted you to know I am so serious by having quality guests on my show. This is a woman, no, seriously, an African-American sister who has prepared herself for ministry, who has heard the call of God on her life and just is working it out, has worked it out, is working it out, and will continue to work it out. And so Khalia is I'm going to say newbie, and I started to use that, but a new pastor's wife. So Khalia is a graduate student. She's in seminary. Let's see, you have a lot of degrees, Khalia, for real you do. And so, but right now you're working on your Ph.D., and I want you to just tell us what you're doing now. Give us a little bit about who you are, and then I'm going to jump in with my stuff.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I am, as you said, working on my Ph.D. at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. So I am currently in my comprehensive exam stage and working toward my dissertation. My research focuses on looking at worship and theology from a womanist perspective, so identifying the ways in which we worship and looking at it from African American women's perspective and learning whatever we can, really to develop more holistic worship that is fitting for the entire community and that's not so much shaped around our historically male-dominated forms of worship. So I look at different things like the arts included in worship, the way in which our bodies engage worship, and even looking at different types of language that we use in worship. So that's where I am today.
Oh, girl, that's some deep stuff. Now, see, I didn't bring you on to talk about that, but you know that in itself, once you finish everything, I'm not going to bother you while you're in the middle of your comprehensive stuff, but I will bother you while you're writing your dissertation. So we are going to have, because that's a great conversation, and I think it's a great piece for Front Row Conversation. So clearly you are a woman who's working it out. Now, this is my first question that I must raise as part of our conversation. When we marry the pastor, how are you able to continue to walk in your true, authentic self?
That's an excellent question, and I think it's a process. It is a growing process, a learning process that I don't think ever really ends. The one thing I have found is now that we've been married for about 8 months now, I found that it's necessary for me to have those covenant relationships where I am able to be fully me and to have my full voice, and then also to be in constant communication with my husband about where I know God's calling me in ministry. So as long as we are both very open and very clear about not just being married to the pastor, but also working out my own ministerial calling, and then working together in doing that.
That's a good piece, because what happens so many times, and then you're new in this role, the advantage of being new, when I was thinking about this show, because I've had pastor spouses on here who have 30-something years in ministry, and one of the things we were saying, we said we have to go back and apologize to our earlier churches, girl, because we were just like, you know, doing whatever. But being new, it's a great time, because it seems to me you're able to have that conversation early on, where we were just like figuring it out as we went along. So you said a couple of key things. You said covenant relationships. I want you to address that. And then you said to make sure you know your ministry. Talk about covenant relationships, and talk about how do you keep from losing your identity or your call specifically that God has given you. I've thrown a lot at you, so make it work, girl.
Okay, so let's start with the covenant relationship. So I'm a firm believer in 2 tiers of covenant relationships. One, definitely with other women who are pastors' wives, but primarily I like the first tier to be individuals who've kind of gone before me and who've already journeyed this road. So
yes, Lord.
That's right. Women who've been married to pastors, who've been in ministry, and who've been doing it for years to help guide me, because I have no idea what I'm doing, right? So just helping me start out. But then also women who are at the peer level as well, so that we are journeying together. And I find that those 2 spaces become very useful, because I can go and talk about all the feelings that I have in times where I feel the internal pull of maintaining my own voice, right, and not losing my voice, and not really being able to figure out and articulate exactly what this internal struggle is. So I found that those relationships have been helpful, and it keeps me sane to know I'm not the only one journeying this road. I'm not the only one who's had these types of struggles. I'm not the only one who's had these feelings. But to be able to say, okay, I'm not crazy, so let's now figure out the process. And
so that's my problem. I'm crazy, so I didn't figure it out. I didn't figure out early, y'all. Y'all heard it. She said sane. Okay. All right. All right. Now, I want to, and you know, when I said that I wanted in this show, I wanted to hear a fresh voice that had not been tossed and turned by the turbulence of ministry. Is that a fair statement, you would say? A fresh voice. And you kind of hit on it with the peer level and the walking like the season level, if I could use the analogy, like having on a pair of shoes. You know, one pair, your left shoe is your season, those who've been at it a while, and then the other shoe is the shoe of your peer. I've never said it that way, so I love that. I will use it again. I will give you credit. When you get to Ph.D., I'll give you credit. All right.
When I get it.
But say more about, how do you feel a fresh voice? I mean, because you have a fresh pair of eyes, and I want to hear about that.
So as far as being a fresh voice, I do feel like I am a fresh voice. I think there are many of us who are fresh voices, particularly because, one, I've gone through seminary, right? So kind of coming into this role, having gone to seminary, and actually that's where my husband and I met. So we were able to kind of work through a lot of our theological stuff together. And that was really good, because it helped me identify who I am and where I stand theologically when it comes to worship in the Black church, when it comes to just the healing of the African American families, when it comes to what it really means to pastor, what it really means to care for a congregation. So because I've had that side of it, and then I've grown up in the church, so of course I've had my own experiences as well. When I pair the two together, I feel like it gives this new perspective that keeps me from becoming jaded very early. That's very helpful. I've heard a lot of the stories of where women come in and they marry the pastor, and within the first 6 months, they are ready to just step out of the church and not.
Girl, you better know it. All right.
That's right. So I think because of the experiences that I've had, I'm able to step back and really have a big picture perspective and really understand and seek out what God is trying to do across the entire point of ministry and marriage for us, and not find myself getting caught up in the little hiccups that we encounter.
That's good, Khalia. That's good. I read some of your bio, and you are truly, as I said before, a woman who has prepared herself. With that being said, and you've kind of addressed it, but what paradigm shifts have you've had to make in ministry as a first lady and a soon-to-be PhD? Let's talk about that. And then I'm going to quote, I was reading a book the other day, Not Without a Struggle, by Bishop Vashti McKenzie, that talks about the paradigm shifts and the different changes that we make. What do you feel that you've had to make, and or continue that conversation, what you were saying prior to that? What paradigm shifts have you had to make?
So the biggest paradigm shift for me is, as you saw in my bio, so I'm an artist. I'm a professionally trained dancer. I think like an artist. I have the abstract mind. In my previous career, I was able to balance it with the business and administrative mind. But the huge paradigm shift is living as an artist, in the sense of just being very creative, very go with the flow. And I have found marrying the pastor and moving into ministry in a partnership requires me to think a little different and to really pull a lot more on that administrative side, right, and the analytical side and all of that, and then not so much put the artist on the back burner, but understand that today in this season isn't the forefront of my focus. And so
that's good, Khalia.
Shift for me.
Okay, that's a good piece. I had never thought about that, because you know what? You are an artist, and artists are the thinking, the free flow, the creative side is key. So that is a good piece. And I'm going to read this quote, which you've kind of addressed, but Bishop Vashti McKenzie states in her book, Not Without a Struggle, that change in a person's life exerts pressures on the pattern. The pattern can either shift to adapt to a new reality or remain stationary, inhibiting change. And then, how have you handled the change in your life with all that you are doing? You've kind of hit on it, even with this other piece with the business side, the administrative side, and the creative. But how have you handled the change in your life with all that you're doing? Newlywed, new first lady, trying to finish up your doctoral degree and stuff. How have you been able to handle all of that?
So honestly, one word: flexibility.
Okay. Say more about that.
It has required me to be flexible and to be very open to kind of moving wherever God needs me to move in the moment, and not necessarily find myself so tied to having to stay and do things in one particular way and having to walk one particular path. It's actually very interesting. About 2 years ago, when I entered into this PhD journey, about the time where I knew, we didn't know he was going to be called to pastor, but we knew eventually that was coming.
Right.
I sat down with my pastor mentor, Dr. Cynthia Hale, and she told me just enjoy the journey and not try to control the journey, but just enjoy it. And so I think that flexibility has allowed me the opportunity to just enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey, enjoy the twists and turns and the changes and everything that have happened, and really just sit back and be very flexible with it, and not so rigid and so caught up on things having to look a certain way and end up a certain way, which used to be my downfall.
Oh, okay, because I was going to say, I was getting ready to say, audience, I was getting ready to have an altar call, because when she was saying, enjoy the journey, I'm like, why somebody didn't tell me that 30-something years ago? Girl, I mean, really, that's people. That's why I'm saying we need a fresh voice. Because I was reflecting while you were talking, and I'm saying, because when you're trying to control the journey, it's like this ice storm that we had a couple of weeks ago in Atlanta, with the weather. You're sliding all over the road. You're over in the ditch. You got to spend the night in your car. You don't have water. You run out of snacks. Because I think that's the greatest advice that your pastor, mentor could have said. Hey, Khalia, enjoy the journey. That's a great piece. Listen, I could almost say I'm done. I'm getting ready to have an altar call and sing just as I am without one plea. Okay, but we're going to continue. We're going to continue this journey. Listen, here's a good piece too. Okay, you are coming into a congregation where the pastoral leadership that you have been in has been there, say, 25 years, if not more. How have you been able to handle the transition with that? Talk about that. Let's laugh a little bit.
Yeah, we have to.
Okay, go ahead.
Honestly, handling the transition, it takes an extreme amount of patience and grace. So being young, I naturally, myself and my husband, naturally, we come in and we have so much zeal, right? And we see where things are going. We see we're a younger generation. We see where things are headed just technologically, socially, all of that. And so we are ready and just on fire and ready to just pick everything up and run with it. And it's taken a level of patience and learning for us to understand not to lose the zeal, but to also learn from the tradition and learn from what's already established and then be able to grow organically. A lot of times I think when we come into new situations and we already have an idea of what we think should happen, we miss the fact that things have to happen organically within a congregation. And so just because we know that in the 21st, 22nd century, technology is going to be here, we need to figure out what that means for us as a congregation, because we may not go all the way where technology is going, but we might find ourselves meeting it halfway and advancing. So I've been able to handle it, like I said, with a lot of patience and just a lot of humility, stepping back and learning, just really learning, looking, observing, feeling where we are, putting my fingers on the pulse of our congregation to understand where we can then grow and progress organically.
Again, audience, I'm saying another. How many times can you go to the altar? Okay, you said a couple of key words, and I want you to talk about. When you say grow organically, what does that mean? Talk about that. What does it mean?
So when I say grow organically, I am talking about growing out of who we are as a congregation.
Okay.
A lot of times we now see these major models, right? We see these mega church models.
Yes.
A lot of these different models that have been packaged and are being marketed to say this is what your church can be. And I disagree with that, because the individuals who are in one church are very different from the individuals in another church. So the spiritual needs, the emotional needs, the physical needs, all of that is different from one congregation to another. So for me, it's important for us not to follow someone else's model, but to really get before God and get within our community and start to understand what needs to happen for us, and then be okay if what does come out of that does not look like these major models that are presented.
I think that's a great part, because there's a book that I read when I joined my husband full-time in ministry called One Size Doesn't Fit All. And one of the things that he says is that every church is not the same. And I think the greatest lesson for us in ministry, for Michael and I in ministry, was to say, who are we as a congregation? And you know, the author says it's like a rubber band. You're stretching, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I think we have to ask the questions. You may have this model: we're going to be a mega church, we're going to grow, and you know, God does want grow. But the other piece of this is understanding what has God said that your ministry or our ministry is to look like. And I think that's the greatest lesson for me at this season was, you know, it's okay. We're an urban ministry. This is who we are. We have younger people in our congregation, but the average age of persons in our congregation are 50 and older. And so we have to also acknowledge that, and then we have to say technology is on the table, y'all. It's not going away. Can I get you to at least get an email account? Okay, I'm sorry. I was having a flash. I was having a flashback. I'm sorry. It's off here. But it, just to say that, and to know that, okay, it's not of the devil, that it really is a thing that God can use. Now, I like that. That was very good about organically. And then you said another word, humility. What about humility as you're maintaining your voice, as you're working out? What lessons have you learned about First Lady, humility, Miss Dancer, artist, working on your Ph.D.? You're a bad sister girl. What have you learned about humility? Or what are you learning, I should say, about humility?
I'm just learning the necessity of humility, and I think that has been a lesson that I've learned even prior to becoming a First Lady, prior to going into a PhD program, but just, following the models of women before me, my mother, my grandmothers, and all of that, and just watching the way in which they served with such grace, the way in which they had so much power, but it was under control, right? It was this controlled power that allowed them to just be so graceful in the way in which they gave, in which they served, and they were very humble about it. And I find that when you are able to serve in such a way, that's when people receive. And so that's been almost a lifelong lesson for me, of just watching particularly my mother and the way in which she served with such grace, and the way in which that humility allowed her to touch so many more lives than she would have if she had not been in that position.
That's a great piece. I like that, service with grace, Khalia, because we're living in a time, you and I are both ordained ministers, and we kind of wear, we wear two hats, but the piece about the serving with grace, and I often joke about this, but I tell people all the time, all over this country, I don't know, Gail Sylvia is global, so I'm going to put this conversation, this piece right here within a Western context, but all over this this country, we see the billboards, and we see the First Lady and the, pastors' wives, with their white shirts on, their blue jeans. I don't have a white shirt, but anyway, girl, I could hardly get in jeans, but, just this whole thing that they're standing, and I'm like, if you really knew what was behind that, and also being in this position, my pastor's wife who mentored me, who was the first woman to really show me what leadership was, lived to be in her 90s, but served a time when women, pastors' wives, really didn't have a voice, but they had power. They were able to navigate the systems. I mean, actually, and I'm going to give God rest her soul, Ann Martin ran that thing for real, as quiet as it's kept. But one of the things that I got from her was, it wasn't about the parking space. I don't even think she had a reserved parking space back then. Okay, no, really. I mean, and and I think if we, the conversation as we're talking about maintaining our voice, it's not the parking space.
That's right.
Now, I'm going to tell you the truth. I really do like to know. It's good I don't have to fight for a parking space on Sunday.
Yeah, that's true.
But God, look at me, God. I know it's not about the parking space. Okay, but don't take it away. Okay, but but it's not about the parking space or the special seat and whatever. Serving with grace. I like that. That's the humility that we saw our foremothers.
That's right.
Walk in that, whose role was not easy many times, who were not acknowledged. And it's a whole nother conversation around women in ministry who didn't have a platform. And who did not have an opportunity. I mean, that's part of my story and part of my journey. So, I mean, that was just a great piece. That really blessed me. That made me feel like Elizabeth when Mary walked in that room, honey, and that baby jumped in her womb. I'm too old to have a baby. But anyway, that's a good piece. Now, I want to, girl, I'm crazy. Okay, here's the other piece. I want to shift. I want you to tell me more about your journey as a liturgist. Did I say that right?
You did.
And a liturgical dance artist. And that's the last piece I want to talk about. That I mean, when I read your bio, and I was one of these, girl, first of all, we couldn't afford dance lessons when we were little, but by the time I could and I was in college, it was like, you're not going to make it with this one. But say more about your role as a liturgist. Explain to the audience what that is, and also as a liturgical dance artist. Say more about your journey with that.
All right. So a liturgist is just basically a leader in worship, someone who leads in worship or someone who plans and puts together worship services. So that would be the easiest way of thinking of a liturgist, someone who kind of handles what happens in worship from beginning to end. So my interest as a liturgist actually started with my interest as a liturgical dancer, which the liturgical dance piece began for me as a child. I started learning dance at the age of 4, and I had been raised in the church, so I never quite understood why I wasn't doing in my church, in worship, what I was doing and learning in the dance studios. And
that's awesome.
I was about 8 the first time I said, I want to start a dance ministry here in my church. The pastor that I was under at the time said, sure. And I brought 2 other young ladies with me. And at 8 years
wait a minute. How did you say 18 or 8?
No, 8. At 8.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was able to bring 2 young ladies with me, and I established the first dance ministry in that church in Los Angeles. And I've been doing that in various forms ever since. And once I got into college, I started to really understand and look at how what I was doing as a liturgical dancer was more than just kind of a special presentation on a Sunday morning, but it was actually a part of worship. And so that's where my interest as a liturgist came in, because I wanted to identify ways of integrating the arts into the worship experience. So it's not just the Christmas play because it's Christmas, but it is indeed understanding that there are people who sit in the congregation who receive in artistic ways, and so our worship should be reflective of everyone's way of receiving, engaging, and experiencing worship. So that's where I got into the study of liturgy, what we do in worship, how do we understand what's happening in worship, and because of that, how do we plan what we do in worship, and how are we really truly being led by the Holy Spirit to encounter in that moment something divine and bring everyone into it with us. So that's really where my interests come from.
Girl, you know I need to be your agent, honey. We need to travel this country, helping us just on Sunday morning, for real.
Come on, let's go.
I mean, that's a wonderful conversation. We got to have, and I know when Gail Sylvia sees this or her text, they said, Felecia, everybody you have on, you say you got to have back. And that's absolutely true. And so, because I really want to have that conversation around worship. I mean, I really want to have a guided, authentic conversation around worship and what that means and what that needs to look like as we look at this. Now, as I said earlier before, as we get ready to close out here, is that you wear a couple of hats, just like I do. You're an ordained minister, yet you're a pastor's wife. How do you think your congregation view you? Pastor's wife or preacher or both? And then my last question is, how do you see yourself?
I think my congregation, well, let's say it's probably split. I think there's a large percentage of my congregation that views me as both.
Okay.
And then there's probably a percentage of the congregation that views me as a pastor's wife. So I find that to be pretty split. Though those who view me as both, I see they are excited about it. I think this is a first for Providence. So they're really excited to have a first lady who is also in ministry and can really connect with them in a different way, so and really help in the ministry and work in the ministry with my pastor.
Okay, then. And how do you see yourself?
I see myself, honestly, I see it as one, really.
Okay.
I see that being a pastor's wife is a part of my call to ministry, so I see it all as one.
Oh, that is great. Now, here's my last thing. How is Khalia? You've already really answered this, but I'm going to close this out. How is Khalia maintaining her voice? And I'm going to give you the areas in marriage. Girl, and maybe you can help me on this one. Okay. I've been married 39 years. Okay. I'm crazy. Love him dearly, Pastor Michael. If you're listening, how are you maintaining your voice in marriage?
Constant communication. Okay. Constant communication. Prior to us getting married, we sought out couples and just said, what advice would you give us going into marriage? And I think of the 20-some-odd couples, all of them that communicate. And so for me, it's just constant communication, even when the communication is not necessarily wanted at that moment.
Exactly.
Finding the time to say, hey,
yes,
you need to communicate. If it's not right now, let's schedule it for a little bit later, or we'll schedule it for tomorrow. But the conversations have to go forth, and they do. So.
Okay, constant communication. Your voice in ministry?
Oh, yes. Well, that is just understanding and finding the spaces to be me, really, really and truly, and not trying to make it, because I'm a pastor's wife, not trying to fit a particular facade or fit a particular picture of what a pastor's wife should be, but just being very true to myself. And always having those funny moments with my husband when he preaches something and I'll say, did you really say this?
Girl, okay.
And then, laughing about it. So finding
that's what we do.
Yeah. And then having times to, teaching Bible studies, all of that is always
right. That's a good piece, because that's always, Michael is married to a seminarian and he's seminary trained. And of course, sometimes I look over my glasses and he gets my eye. I'm like, okay, did you really say that? Okay, did you really consider that in the text? Really, Michael, is what I'm saying. So thank God we don't have bubbles over our heads in worship services and stuff. And then this is a big piece, and you really answered this. How do you maintain your voice to yourself? Have those authentic conversations with yourself.
Just that, having the authentic conversations with myself and taking the time for self-care. That helps me maintain my voice when I feel like I am getting lost in the noise of everything else. Just being intentional about stepping back and caring for me and really understanding what is my voice saying right now. And if it's just sitting and journaling that out, if it's a new paper I'm going to write about, if it's a new topic, whatever it is, just investing the time in me to do that.
Well, audience, you have heard it from a fresh voice. I promise you, I was so blessed by your words, Khalia, and I appreciate you taking taking the time out of your busy schedule to have a conversation with me on Front Row Conversations. Well, as I close it out, always.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it's just wonderful. I mean, I was really helped. So I think maybe, I said, I don't know, I said earlier off air, what God is doing with me and Gail Sylvia with this with this talk show. I'm so excited about it. And when I sit here and listen to people week after week and today, I said, if nothing more, it's helping me to grow as a person. So I always close with this scripture from Philippians 1:6, and it says, God who began a good work in you will bring it to completion. God who will, girl, I forgot my scripture, Philippians 1:6. But anyway, I quote it every week. God who began a good work in you shall bring it to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. I love that scripture because it lets me know as we're figuring it out, God is still working on us. I always want to acknowledge the presence and the ministry and the what God is doing in the life of Gail Sylvia through SylviaGlobalMedia.com, and I'm just so excited to be a part of this. Thank you, Gail Sylvia. Thank you, Khalia Williams, for being with us today, maintaining your voice while working it out. Thank you, Khalia.
Thank you so much, Felecia.
Okay, have a great day.
You too.
Okay.